The Agenda with Steve Paikin is presented by Vale Inco. Growing together.
And joining us now, Barrie Zwicker, author of Towers of Deception, The Media Cover-Up of 9/11. Good to have you in TVO tonight.
Good to be here.
Nice to see you, Barrie. Okay, let's go back to September 11th, 2001. Did you see it on television as it unfolded?
I did.
What was the first thing that went through your mind when you saw it?
Well, you know, I have to tell you that I've had a long interest in aviation all my life. I was a member of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, became a flight sergeant, flew a Twin Beach, and I still look up at airliners when they go over. So that's an important thing to note. So I saw the tower, the second plane go into the second tower. And then I was in my writing studio on the third floor of our house. I went down to the living room, and I'm watching, and people joined us, my wife and I. And I said, look, where's the U.S. Air Force here? I was getting exercised because the crawl said, you know, airliners are going all over Hell's Half Acre. They're heading for Washington, they're heading here, and they're heading there. And so I'm saying, come on, U.S. Air Force. Come on, U.S. Air Force. I'm jumping up and down and screaming. My wife says, calm down.
Are you thinking anything nefarious at this point?
Yeah, right away. I'm saying, where is the U.S. Air Force? I know they scramble in minutes. And now, like an hour has gone by, and there's still no interception has taken place. You know, it was almost 2 hours before any U.S. jet turned a wheel, almost 2 hours.
Well,
so I said, wait, this is impossible. I got very calm. I said, this is not possible. And that was my first entree into the suspiciousness of the events, was the lack of the U.S. Air Force.
Let me pick up on that, because you allege in your documentary and your book that Vice President Cheney ordered war games for the Air Force on 9/11 so that there would be no planes available in the sky to tackle these hijackers. Yeah. How do you know that?
Well, I don't know that. I don't know that. Those of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, we're called 9/11 Truthers. I'm proud to be called a 9/11 Truther. We don't normally try to say what happened because it was a huge, complicated crime. But we can say what didn't happen quite often. And we can say, and the world knows, those U.S. fighter jets did not show up. Now, there's a lot of evidence, including from Transportation Secretary Mineta of the time, that Cheney was in control of a chain of command on that day. Michael Rupert says in his book, Crossing the Rubicon, that it was a separate chain of command and control, separate from the normal civil aviation and military.
But I want to be clear, I understand. Are you suggesting Cheney wanted to make sure that there would be no planes available to take on these hijackers because it was in his interest and his administration's interest to have these planes hit the towers and a catastrophe befall the United States?
Regrettably, yes. I mean, we can't pussyfoot around this. This horror happened. And the explanations, the official explanations that have been provided have been laughable. I mean, they're just anomalies and contradictions and absurdities abound. One of them is, as I say, that U.S. Air Force didn't show up. Then you had another case.
Okay, but what's his motive?
Well, the motive, and this is speculation, if you will, informed speculation, I hope, is what might be called the global domination project of the American empire, certainly resource theft, because this was used to help to justify the war in Iraq, which had 25% of the world's sweet oil. And, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan, which regrettably Canada's involved in, which involves pipelines from the Caucasus and so on. So there's a lot of energy there in the Middle East.
Why would they need a massive disaster like this to justify that?
Well, that's a question. It's a good question, one that's often asked. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they could have gotten along with their normal lying. For instance, about WMDs in Iraq and about how Saddam allegedly had a role in 9/11, which even the CIA early on said wasn't so. CIA sticks with that to this day. So people say, well, they just could have done their normal lying and deception and caused it. But what they needed was an iconic event, like the burning of the Reichstag, the German Reichstag in 1933 was. These are pivotal. These change history. And you get the ballooning military budgets, you get the crackdown on civil liberties, you get your wars of resource theft, and it just supercharges everything. And I'm writing a book right now about, they're called false flag operations. And they're more common than not in history. Most wars have been triggered by a fake event, by an event where it is claimed that some enemy has attacked us, but really it's been the black operators have carried out the attack.
Most famous, I guess, is the Gulf of Tonkin that got America into Vietnam.
And I'm proud to say I was wise to that at the time, too. I was working for the Globe and Mail at the time, and I remember seeing LBJ's, statements about this, and horribly it went. The House of Representatives voted unanimously for that Gulf of Tonkin resolution. 88-2 was the vote in the Senate.
Just because it happened that way 45 years ago under Lyndon Johnson does not necessarily follow that that's what happened this time. You'll agree with that, right?
No, it does not necessarily follow. But these are just common as dirt, regrettably, in history. It's the chief trick of rulers.
2 months after 9/11, you have a meeting with Victor Malarick of the Globe and Mail. He leads up the Globe and Mail's investigative unit, and you try to interest him on pursuing the angle that, what do you call yourselves, the 9/11
9/11 truthers. Well, we weren't called that then.
Okay. Nothing happens.
That's right.
He doesn't go after it.
To this day.
Tell me why it makes sense that journalists who, as I think it's fair to say as a general rule, are hungry to get any story that will poke a hole in any authority, anywhere, somehow refuse to go after a story that, on the face of it, seems so self-evident to you.
That's huge. That's why I wrote this book, Towers of Deception.
What's the answer, though?
There's no one answer. Journalists are human beings like everybody else. We are subject to peer group pressure. We're subject to careerism. We don't want to look bad. We don't want to have egg on our face. We want to look like heroes. But sometimes we're up against a huge sort of anomalies and even in this case, conspiracies. The official 9/11 story, by the way, is a conspiracy theory, literally. You have to choose between conspiracy theories in connection with 9/11. But anyway, then there are some people who are owners of the media. Most of the media are commercial, unlike here. And the owners, and I've been doing this media criticism since 1970. I published Content Magazine, Sources Directory. And the thing is that the owners choose the top executives. And the top executives choose the executive editors, and everyone is chosen.
That's all true, but what reporter wouldn't want to break this story?
Victor Malarick, to name one, and I can name you all sorts of other reporters. They are in the same cocoon of propaganda, if you will, that we all live in, and it's a matter of great distress to me that there aren't more reporters who have true courage. But when you look at the really, really big issues in history, you find that very few reporters have actually gone to the basis of it. People like I.F. Stone. Very few I.F. Stones in journalism history.
Yep. Izzy Stone was one of the great muckrakers of all time.
One of the great ones.
Give us then what you believe to be what actually transpired that day.
Well, you know what? I'm very chary about that question because I want to say that 9/11 truthers, it's not incumbent on us to say what happened. As I said earlier, it was a huge, complex crime and a huge, complex cover-up. And by the way, it's well known that the more difficult a crime is, the more complicated the crime is. Similarly, the people who carried it out will have a complicated cover-up. Of course, they think of doing that, so they come together.
Can I just understand? Let's see how much you and our audience can agree on here.
Yeah.
Were there 19 Arab hijackers who flew planes into buildings?
Okay, now there's a very, very good example of a question where I cannot and do not pretend to have a definitive answer. What I would say is this. I've been researching this, for 6.5 years. Now, one of the other researchers, a guy named Elias Davidson in Reykjavik, Iceland. I've met with him. I went to Iceland, met with him. He's a civil rights and a human rights worker and researcher, tremendously respected. He does very careful work. Now, he has looked very deeply into this. He's done a paper, which I sent to your producer, and he's been working for about a year on this. And what I would say is this. There's a spectrum of opinion on that. Some people would say, absolutely, there were 19 crazed Muslim hijackers, just like the government says. For sure, I believe that.
Is there any doubt about that?
Just a minute, if I may just. The other pole, the other end of the continuum is, no, they absolutely were not. They were patsies and they didn't even board the planes. Okay, that's your continuum.
Do you have a view on which
I
is
do
more
have.
correct?
I do. I'm way over toward the side that says I can't find very much evidence that, in fact, they even boarded the planes. And here's what I go by, and very much relying on Elias Davidson. U.S. government facts and figures and pronouncements about this don't back up the popular story that the media put out and politicians put out. The FBI has never provided proper birth dates even for these guys. But you have to look into the details, and we don't have time right now.
No, but how about this? How about we look into a tape recording of Osama bin Laden, who was quoted on the tape recording as having said, you know, may Allah be praised for the 19 hijackers having done Allah's will.
Oh.
Are you saying that the U.S. and Osama were in on this together?
Yeah, well, now we get into another area of deception. The first Osama bin Laden tape was an audio tape in which he said, look, I didn't do this. I didn't have anything to do with it. Like Lee Harvey Oswald saying, I'm a patsy. That was the first audio tape. Then in December of 2001, there was this videotape where allegedly Osama bin Laden said, be patient, my friends, you know, there will be greater destruction, Allah, and all that. Osama bin Laden, this is absolutely documented, was an asset of the CIA.
Yes.
He's a member of the bin Laden family, one of the largest construction firms in the world, and Osama was the foreman of the Coast Tunnel Project, KHOST. It was a huge multi-million-dollar tunnel project in Afghanistan built for the CIA to store their munitions.
You'll acknowledge that family's relationship with the U.S. has gone south since then.
Oh yeah, but we know that the Bushes and the Bin Ladens, there was a big headline in the Toronto Sun shortly after 9/11. You get these anomalies which said that Bush and Bin Laden had close connections. Actually, Bush and Bin Laden. Well, then that just goes down the memory hole. But anyway, you cannot depend on alleged tapes from Bin Laden.
You think it's disinformation, those tapes?
Oh yeah. There's tapes. I have a friend actually who works for the CBC. He's a high-tech guy, and he's examined some of these tapes, and there's very peculiar things about them.
You know Jim Bamford?
Yes, James Bamford.
James Bamford.
Puzzle Palace.
A Pretext for War, 9/11 Iraq and the Abuse of American Intelligence Agencies. That's his book. When asked about 9/11 being an inside job, he had this to say. He said, the U.S. didn't have a clue before the attack. I also found no evidence that the U.S. government was involved in the attack. Here's someone who is not using past U.S. misdeeds as proof or evidence of what happened on 9/11. Yeah. Here's someone whose work I think you respect, who disagrees with you.
Well, look, I respect lots of people's work, and I disagree with them. Take Noam Chomsky. And people respect my work and they disagree with me. James Bamford is very disappointing that he would say that. However, James Bamford has a very, very close relationship with the establishment in Washington. He's got a houseboat there. Often there's CIA people, NSA people, and everything at the social occasions on James Bamford's houseboat. Okay, now it's a symbiotic relationship. This is why he was the guy that exposed Operation Northwoods, that infamous case where the Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously signed off on a false flag operation that would have blamed Castro for shooting down a U.S. airliner, would have triggered war with Cuba. Okay. He was the guy that exposed that. So they give him stuff that he can really use.
Okay.
But in return, he has to do something.
I got a couple of minutes left and I want to hit on a few more things here. Why is gross incompetence not a good enough explanation for what happened on 9/11/01?
Well, the incompetence theory can't hold up because, for instance, with the U.S. Air Force, to go back to that, it's a rather simple explanation. And Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bowman, this wonderful 9/11 truther, formerly head of the Star Wars program for Ronald Reagan, says, look, don't blame those flyboys for it. If any of the pilots he worked with, he did 101 missions in Vietnam, he said if any of those pilots really knew what was happening, they would have broken the rules. They would have hit the taps, hot-tailed it to New York, and they could have made it. They were given confusing orders. And so, in other words, there's no way to call it incompetence, really, when you look at the totality of the evidence.
If this story,
it's interference.
Though, okay, if this story is as big and if the conspiracy is as all-encompassing as you say, presumably there would have to be more than a few people involved in it. And if that's true, does it not strain credulity to assume that dozens, hundreds of people could keep this conspiracy and not and everybody's keeping the secret?
No, it doesn't strain credulity at all. You know, there was the Manhattan Project, and that involved 48 installations in 19 U.S. states and Canada, right? To do the atom bomb was decided in 1939, and it wasn't until 1945, when the bomb exploded over Hiroshima, that the world came to know about the secret project, okay? That was all kept totally quiet all the time.
It was a secret, but it wasn't an attempt to deceive the public. There's a difference.
Well, yeah, but secrecy can be used to deceive, or just simply to keep something secret that is allegedly a benign project. But, you know, if I could squeeze in one more thing, I've been really trying to be good about answering your questions. The very term conspiracy theory is extremely questionable, Steve. It's a psychological put-down of the worst kind. Not when it's used in its normative sense, but when it's used as a put-down. which is to say that I don't agree, what you're saying, I think you're mentally incompetent. It strikes fear into people's hearts to be told that they're a wacko or a conspiracy nut.
I haven't used any of those words
No,
today.
you haven't.
No, all right.
But I know there's a panel after. And the word paranoid is in this program. That's why I wanted to get that in, if I could, before we finish.
One last question, last 20 seconds. Who killed John F. Kennedy?
You want the short answer that from all the books, just my speculation, I think Alan Dulles was at the center of it. CIA was very, very closely involved. JFK had said he wants to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He was winding down the Vietnam War in spite of what Noam Chomsky says. He wanted price controls for Bethlehem Steel. There are 6 or 7 things he was doing that put him in the crosshairs. They couldn't abide him anymore. That was a conspiracy. And you know what? Something
There's no
like
evidence for any of that, though, is there?
76%. You know what happens when conspiracy theories are on the rise, which they are now, except I'm using it in the normative sense. It's because there are major changes in economic or social power. People notice these changes, and then they hear explanations about the changes that don't make sense to them. And they go and look for information, and they find out there's a disconnect between what the media and the politicians and officials are telling them and what they're finding out. And then they start to theorize, which is a normal thing to do.
We're going to continue the theorizing on the other side of the studio.
I'd love to be with you guys. But
Barrie, we thank you for getting it started tonight.
Well, okay.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin was presented by Vale Inco. Growing together.